Frank, great to catch up. It's been a long time, and really look forward to having the conversation. But yeah, thanks for joining.
No, and thank you for having me. Honor and a privilege.
Yeah. So, what part of the world are you in right now?
So I'm still based in Dublin. I so when we obviously met at this stage in 2010, so 13 years ago, and almost to the day, it's actually when we started working together. So since then, still here, still happy in Dublin. Weather this time of the year isn't great. It's very dark, but I wouldn't swap it.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, if you don't have weather to complain about, you can't be Irish. But you're not Irish anyway. This is where we first met. We'll probably get into that origin story, but maybe just for people that are listening that don't know you, who are you? You know, a little bit about who you are, kind of what you're doing, and then we can maybe get into the story and just some backdrop that's pretty fun as well.
So the one thing I always start off with is born communist, converted capitalist. So born behind the Iron Curtain, the German accent is not put on. That's actually me. So I was born and raised in East Germany. Wall came down when I was a teenager, which was very fortunate for me. Started my career off in Deutsche Bank, and at the time, for everybody, like job for life, clearly wasn't for me. I left the bank and done my military service. May not go into details there because once I started, I'm an explosive expert by trade in the military, in the engineers. Had great fun, but I've done my mandatory service and then actually left Germany in '98. So I haven't lived there since. Went to the UK with two words of English, yes and no. Didn't know what I said yes and no to, so started working as a waiter there. And when got my English to a level that was a lot more proficient. Moved to Dublin in early 2000 and started with Lufthansa there. And took my first management role in 2000 as well. So at the tender age of 23, took over a team of 22 people and learned management the hard way, truly the hard way. And when people ask me, would you do it again? I will always say yes, clearly I would. Would I recommend it? As long as you know what you're getting into, probably yes. I can't say no because I enjoyed it, obviously, but it is quite tough. And for the longest time, I was the youngest in the room when you have manager meetings or anything like this. Now I'm the dumbest in the room for different reasons. Not the youngest anymore. But with Lufthansa, I moved then to Canada as well. So I've done 3 years in Canada, just outside of Toronto, where I managed the front office for a center there. So that's 200 people, 6 to midnight, 7 days a week. Again, I was rather young with my first P&L responsibility then, and learned skills like 3 seconds average call time saving is 12 headcounts a year. And when you have turnover of 80 people, 80%, that saves you 12 people headcount. So it's things like this. It's all for me in my career has always, I look back now, it's always been learning. But that being said, coming back from Canada, PayPal came actually to me at just the right time. We wanted to go anyway back to Europe. I joined PayPal back in 2007. That was just after the eBay acquisition and everything went through as well. And then joined within PayPal the merchant acquisition team, so sales team there. Done basically a sideways, I would call it a sideways step from a management role there into a sales management role. But I stopped managing managers. I took a frontline manager role. But again, I see it as a sideways step. Took a team on temporarily. At the time, basically, I was told, Frank, yeah, we need somebody in sales that carry the bag, who's been a true sales leader, and we just need you to hold over the team. Would you just do it temporarily for us? Of course I would. Why wouldn't I? So I stepped in, and when you have only a couple of months, clearly, I looked at what are the big rocks? What can you actually achieve and make a difference? And impact is a word I use a lot in our days. The time I may not have to add the terminology always, but for the sales team, it was quite straightforward. Commission wasn't paid correctly. They had problems with payments. The fight between sales operations, finance, and the sales team. And I called it the wood for the tree problem. Like they were fighting over it every 2 weeks. There was a payment cycle and they couldn't find their way out. Fresh set of eyes, I come in and I found a very, very simple solution. So simple that I won't even share it now, but in the end, I just gave them the solution. And because we had 2 weeks pay cycles as well, the benefit was seen very, very quickly. So, long story short, sales team now, big fans, they like Frank and want to keep Frank. And then I traveled out to all the countries because, like it is for a lot of companies that have centralized sales teams, here in Dublin, for example, as well, but it kind of is valid for other locations as well. The countries own the headcount, but they don't steer the headcount. So the operations teams here steer the headcount, but the countries pay for it. So I traveled out into the biggest countries, which at the time were France, Italy, and Germany. I didn't manage the UK or Ireland. So met the local leaders there, so the country heads, and had a conversation about what their sales teams actually are meant to do, so what they can expect, and asked them what they actually expect from them. So provided more clarity than anything. And I mean, since you know me, candor is definitely something I can do quite well. So I was really honest with them with certain things that we won't be doing, that we can't be doing. And they all like that. They like that somebody finally told them what's really going on, and that I was pushing back on certain things as well. So they asked for me to stay anyway. So I got that sales role permanently. Done really well then. 400% year-over-year growth is kind of the headline. So we changed basically within the team how we were going to sell. And I don't take claim to the idea. I never do. I hired a guy who was highly overqualified for the role. He just wanted a 9-to-5 job. I brought him in and he said, Frank, I could do so much better. And we were a very inbound lead type sales environment. We would call it telesales. And that's what we called the teams at the time as well. And he wanted to create his own leads. And everything though was process mapped and structured. So I said, Carsten was his name, do it. Don't talk about it. It's on me if somebody comes and asks and if it goes wrong. He done it. He's done really well. And now my next thought is it scalable? And by the way, again, at the time, we didn't even have the terminology. I didn't think in the word scalable, but I thought, he's clearly overqualified. I need to know if the others can do it. Otherwise, it's useless. Added a few more people on the pilot. Now it became a proper pilot. We started to actually create our own process maps because they were all really successful as well. And once I had the numbers, I went to the wider organization locally and also in the countries we were supporting, explained what we were doing differently. Obviously, with 400% year-over-year growth, nobody would argue. And in fact, the entire global organization was becoming, basically took our structure. Now there was a lot more resources put on it and everything. They fine-tuned it, but globally they rolled out our structure and became a pure inside sales environment from pure telesales environment. And at the time then, because it worked so well, I was actually talking to Oracle. They offered me a nice little senior management role and everything. But you remember Lindsay probably, Lindsay Browning, who just had joined LinkedIn. And a true LinkedIn story, I said just congratulations on LinkedIn to her and said, well done. LinkedIn sounds very interesting. She came back to me and says, hey Frank, great hearing from you. By the way, we have a manager role going. It's not yet posted, but if you want to look at it, I'd be happy to send it to you.
This is a point right now where it's like, this is the story where Wade and Frank's life merge. And, one of the things that I think that backdrop, I was just going to take a pause for people who are watching or listening to this, that the journey that you went on there had so much to do with why it made sense, from my perspective of what we were looking for. And I think as people are navigating professionally, sometimes they don't know, like on purpose, drawing everything out the way you think it's going to work doesn't always. If you look at your background with, first of all, being an explosives expert, that's always important. But, Deutsche Bank, PayPal, Lufthansa, like you're in Germany, UK, Canada, Ireland, probably not all scripted out when you were 12 years old what you wanted to do, but all of that happened to bring out this combination of who you were and I guess when you say talent and opportunity, right? The what is it that when preparedness and opportunity meet, that's when success happens. So anyway, this is definitely a catalyst for us. But yeah, I'd love to hear your version of how that went, and I can give my version of it. And then there was a journey there, but then some of your recent changes too. I think a lot of people are in different places in their career would make different choices. Some are for safety, some are for growth, some are for, risk, all different reasons. But at this point, when you got to the point, Lindsay talking to you about this LinkedIn opportunity, what was going on in your personal life? Kind of, where were you as a outside of work? And kind of what's the touch point there?
So I was still a married man. When I say still a married man, that's a whole different story. But at the time, still a happily married man as I was, and I was just looking for a career move, but I wasn't quite clear on what exactly that would be. Sales is definitely something I found a home in, so that's something I wanted to pursue. Oracle was a great opportunity as well, and Oracle coming to me, and I had great conversations there. And to be fair, they were really open as well what the role was about. There was politics involved, a lot of politics involved, so they needed somebody specifically with a German background as well to deal with some of this. There were certain things that kind of raised a few alarm bells for me, but it was a great offer, a great role, and I liked the transparency I was provided with when you're going into something like this. But LinkedIn wasn't really, so PayPal was also something I was open to if I was to see the opportunity. I wasn't necessarily looking to move away, but I was looking to grow. I was looking for an opportunity. And then the whole LinkedIn idea, when I started that conversation with Lindsay, I didn't even know how LinkedIn was making money. I've been on LinkedIn for quite some time. I tried to get my teams on it, but we were using a free version. And to be fair, in Europe at the time, there were far from the numbers. It's not 1 billion members, far from it at the time. So talking to Lindsay, my first questions was, how do you guys work? I mean, when you talk about a sales manager role, what do you sell? So before we even got to talk, I needed to find that out. And then we started talking, and this was, it all happened quite quickly in a way, and it wasn't planned, but it got more exciting every conversation. And it got more exciting the more I looked into it as well. And the one thing I distinctly remember is, also after I then had started, I mean, it's obvious I had started the role, I'm not taking away from it. But the thing is, I met incredibly, not only smart people, because you can throw that compliment around to everybody, but incredibly driven people. And it was a very different energy around every single person. I mean, got to meet Ariel obviously as well in the process, and a lot of people. It's just been a very interesting energy that came out of the entire pool of people that is very difficult to encapsulate just in words. It's smart, driven, it's fine, you can hire for this, but the energy that was generated as well, because everybody seemingly had the feeling we're onto something here. But at the time in Dublin, we weren't quite 30 people yet. Globally, we weren't 1,000 people yet. So it just was on this cusp. And you talked about meeting opportunity. You know, in hindsight, everybody will always tell you, oh, you were lucky. Luck is something that people make. And I would clearly define always, luck is when a person actually takes the opportunity that's in front of them and then works hard. And at the time, it never feels like luck. It looks like luck many, many years later when you look back and say, meeting weight and getting through that interview process and actually getting hired despite, and I'm not going to tell the cat story, I'll let you tell that, but despite actually some of those kind of weird conversations where you thought like, is this guy really right or not? Like, it's not just luck, it's a lot of kind of, then once you're in it as well, work and everything. But at this point in time, I had a job in front of me, I had the offer that paid better, had a higher title behind it, and was for a company that everybody knows. So it's like the saying, if you buy IBM, you can't make a mistake. If I would have gone to Oracle, I wouldn't have made a mistake.
From a hiring manager standpoint, you've done this a lot too. And I know people, watching a lot of people who are either in the talent business or they're, hiring managers. I knew that we were starting up, this was LinkedIn Talent Solutions. At the time, it was really the only major enterprise outside of marketing solutions, and 2/3 of the revenue. We went looking back, like you said, it looks like a big wave. We went from 10 million to 100 million in less than 2 years in Europe. And that was a sprint. But we knew we needed to have inside sales. And we knew we were going to do that in Ireland, in Dublin. So for me, the hiring profile was someone who could have, you use two words, you use impact and candor. So, and someone who could put structure together, put operational excellence together, hire people who are overqualified probably, that can scale rapidly, and at the end of the day, make the right impact, doing the right things, with the right character and work ethic. And, I looked at, we had a lot of candidates, and I said, okay, here's a guy who's, I want somebody who understands structure, understands process, who can sort of build the machinery. Here's a guy who's German, he's got a military background, he's got Lufthansa, PayPal, Deutsche Bank. Really the credibility of that was pretty exceptional. And what you had done in the past, it was, on paper, it was good, but there's a personal side of this. And one of the stories that I love, back then it was Skype. This is a good example of, you can be a market leader and fail if you don't keep up, right? Skype was the one. And so you and I were having, I think interview number whatever, not too many, because I knew I was competing against Oracle. It was an unknown brand in Europe with a little office, competing against one of the biggest tech companies in the world. And here, from a profile standpoint and a resume CV standpoint, you had all the right things, but we had this intangible that was, you had to know whether we could work together, and so did I. So for those of you listening, this is pretty funny. We got through a lot of the things that just made perfect sense, and we aligned, especially logically, the logic and the science of building a go-to-market organization at scale. And Frank was too perfect. Like, he was buttoned up, he was perfectly centered inside of the Skype window. And right when he's in the middle of this, and he's all booted and suited, right in the middle of this, his cat jumps up on his shoulder. And I'm like, this is awesome. And at first you just try to not say anything, and then pretty soon the little tail was kind of going around your ear, and then you just had to you just let go and just laughed about it. And it was, I saw the person, I saw the human and the humor inside of you, which one of the things looking back was one of the things that built the culture, I think, in Dublin, was your drive, but that ability to deal with the unknown and the humor and the light side of it. You didn't take the cat and wing it. You didn't also ignore it. You just dealt with it how it was. And it's probably my favorite story about the early part of our relationship, because it's unpredictable, unusual, handled well. And I think it's probably many moments like that you had to deal with as you went from, really, like you said, maybe a dozen or plus people, to a team that was, speaking 20 some languages, reaching all of Europe, Middle East, and Africa. It was a pretty interesting run. But thanks for dealing with the cat correctly. Your cat gets credit for the job, and that was fun. But I think you mentioned the people, and you were a big part of not only being one of the leaders with that mindset, but just bringing people together. So many companies try to create programs and systems to get the right people, to get the right diversity, to get, we didn't have any of that. But yet your team was like exceptionally driven, talented, and very, very different. Like, one of the most diverse teams that I've seen put together, especially in a country like Ireland. And I don't know if that was by design, but I'd love to hear a little bit about because you assembled this exceptional team, and you've got to be super proud of just the journey so many of that early team went on. Like, you could trace the career paths still today on LinkedIn. I've seen these people's career paths that started out sometimes first job, and you were hiring them, you were placing bets a lot. What did you think about then, and probably now, but about people? Like, how, I think one of the things you've done the best at is identify great talent, and somehow building this scalable machine, though, give them the freedom to be themselves. There's a balance there. So love to hear your philosophy just around people.
Now I can conceptualize it a lot better than at the time we were doing it for a reason. But now I can word it a lot better than I would have at the time. But again, giving freedom and space for people to operate because that's what people want. So I talk about, and that's the German saying it, instead of rules, I prefer guidelines. At the beginning, specifically when we started off, you needed to keep them very broad because we needed to figure it out. And ideally, your team helps you figure it out. But that was my learning from PayPal. I hired a guy who actually changed the entire business. I was just the enabler. So that's why rather than giving him a clear black and white, this is what you do, here's what your day is going to look like, give them the space to show us what's the best way to do their job as well. With parameters obviously around it where you don't want it a free for all because let's be fair, I haven't had 100% record. Nobody does when you hire. There's always some risk in that. But yeah, when you see the careers of many people who've been there, and I still meet quite a few of them, and we obviously are all in touch, it's been an incredible ride. But the key thing for me was also, when you talk diversity at the time, we're talking 2010, we looked at it clearly, not exactly with the ESG focus as it is today, but more so for me was always different skill set, different experience. That's what makes the best team. And the example I would always use, and in sales, it's so simple. Sales, that's why I love sales. Sales always comes down to money and a number. But if you put 10 people in a room, 10 sellers in a room, and you hire your one kind of blueprint perfect salesperson, how do those 10 people learn from each other? Now, they might be very good, but they will not get better. Now, you take 10 people in a room that have at least all of them something unique, a background, a skill set, an experience that nobody else has. And they bring that into the room and they share that. Now, what happens just now is 10x. For all of them, they get 9 back the one they're given. And that's simple math. Salespeople do simple math really well. So if I give one guy 9 back, I will give that one. So that's how you create a culture though as well. And this was, I think, one thing we've done really, really well. But that wasn't a Frank idea. And I don't think it was just a Wade idea. That was the entire LinkedIn global organization. It was so much about culture. We talked about it a lot, but it's and I don't remember who said it, but it's about not having the words on the wall. It's not about just throwing it at the wall and then we once a year go in our review sessions and pull the word back out and see, can we knock him down for it or not? It's just not the way to do culture. We, I think, really wanted to live and breathe it. We held ourselves responsible for it. And that just created a different environment. But making it really more of a, we talked about as well, like what I just shared, the 10 people in a room. And that's diversity for us, different skill sets. We also talked about how do we celebrate certain things and how do we bring people along. We spoke about that really from a cultural aspect more so than how it translates into numbers, but it always translated into numbers. And that's the key. I think when people get it right, it will translate into numbers. And you need to correlate it because then you get buy-in. So if you can explain, hey, like I talk about fun, I can tell you later a story about my Microsoft fun experience. When I talk about fun, people think, oh, this crazy German, what's he talking about? But fun is not about coming in telling jokes the whole day. It's about creating that environment of belonging. And I think it was Pat Waters who brought that belonging into the organization as terminology. But I think we always tried to do exactly this. We just didn't talk about it in the terms. But it's truly kind of everybody wanted to be part of it. And hiring became within year 2 and 3 so much easier as well. Because work got out quickly and everybody wanted to be in there. But in year 1, that wasn't quite the case yet. Because, again, we were this little startup that was just in hyper growth.
You said something interesting that, I think it was a good example of an organization that didn't worry so much about the words on the wall, but the spirit of it. And it kind of becomes, a good reflection on leadership. If you look at, Jeff Weiner, Mike Gampson, and organizations, they upheld a certain type of standard of how you treat one another. Call it what you will. But I think there was that. And then this idea of, just like you said, in a sales organization, in revenue, it's points on the board. And it's very measurable. But, I know that early on, I remember seeing some pretty senior people come in and get moved out quickly because they didn't treat people right. Didn't matter how well they were performing. And then it became, just like you mentioned, it was almost like a self-cleansing organization. The peers would not put up with someone who didn't have the right spirit about it. And that idea of, I think they changed the wording later. One of our values was demand excellence. And I think softer word later, but that demand excellence, I think, I remember you would come to me at the time, you were reporting to me, and that candor you have, you'd say, I have something I want to share with you. Are you open to feedback, whatever? And you would say, boom, 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 these 3 things I've noticed. And it would be spot on. And I never felt uncomfortable with that. I don't think any of us did. And that's where I think when you get the ego out of the way, but the work ethic also, like you mentioned, I mean, how many times was that team back and forth on some kind of, whatever we didn't use Slack, whatever we used back then, 11 o'clock at night, 5 o'clock in the morning, you're in an airplane somewhere. And, I don't know, but I think that, listen, how you think about that level of kind of all in, and yet we didn't hear a lot about sort of problems with work-life balance and all that. Because people had joy, they had energy, their loved ones were brought along the journey with them. Once they start getting bored and plateau, then they get tired and work-life balance hits. I don't know, that's my perception. But you've been with a lot of organizations that have been, full on, and then you've been with organizations that are maybe slower growth. But what have you seen with this, especially early career and end of career people as they think about the harmony between professional and personal life?
And that was always an important one from day one. I spent time on that with the team as well. And specifically when you start then having managers in place, because everybody has a different way of their experience as well, what they're bringing in, and therefore how to manage their team. So one thing, for example, I don't and this is something not only LinkedIn years after, I don't let people send emails to their team on Sundays or on the weekend in general. You just don't do that. If you choose to sit there on a Sunday and do your emails, I won't stop you. But you don't set that standard for your team, because I worked in an environment in paper for one of our leaders there, and I spoke to her about it because you experienced that as well. I'm quite frank, no pun intended, when I talk about those things. The key thing is, like, she sat down on a Sunday afternoon and opened her laptop because she had nothing else to do. She was on the comment over here, so she started sending emails. You know what we all did at the time, still with Blackberries with a little wheel on the side? We started to basically compete who responds first, and you get into this 2 or 3 hour email war on a Sunday afternoon, which impacts everybody's family life. And because I had that experience, it's one thing I was really keen on not doing that. And I spoke about this though as well. So first of all, I made it a rule for my managers not to do it, but I spoke to the wider team about this, because that means as well, if somebody breaks that rule, I will hear about it and I can basically address it. And then I do expect people to turn up on the Monday, and this is again very ambitious targets. We celebrated. I done crazy stuff with the team as well. We had fun, and sometimes we had more fun than probably we want to discuss on a podcast. But we came back in the next morning, and we started working, and we produced numbers, and that was the important thing. And when people talk about work hard, play hard, I'm not sure if that's the terminology I would use for this, but you need to give people the space. And also, when you go out and you have fun, it can't be mandatory, because everybody has different personal and life circumstances. And to be fair, people came to me and gave me feedback. Hey, all those parties, there's always alcohol and parties involved. That's not my thing. So we needed to figure out doing things differently. So we tried to do events where that wasn't the core to that event. So it's about really trying to create an environment where people, yes, you can let loose, you let out steam once in a while as well. But when you turn up in the morning, you turn up ideally in time, and you produce your work. And also flexibility was always key, because we didn't have this remote working, work from home. But when you had somebody with a small kid at home and they need to pick them up at a certain time, let them pick it up. Because one thing I always said, and I was probably not the best HR representative in that case, because I said there isn't a rule for all. If I see you working, I give you more flexibility. And I don't need you to tell me how many hours you work this week, that you can take the 2 or 3 hours on a Friday because you're traveling somewhere. I trust you take and give that time back as well. But if I see that not being given, I won't allow you to do it again. that's kind of where we started to set out standards. So if you set out clearly what you expect, and the key then is, and this is where some people get it wrong, you have to obviously live that standard as well. Because the worst leaders are always the ones who set out standards and then they break them every single time. If you do something different, sorry, you lead from the front. And this is, I think, what worked so well as well. Because throughout the organization, I think we had that. And therefore, I think the success we had on keeping people still talking about their time in LinkedIn and usually really in glowing terms is because we did figure out how to get that balance right without always putting terminology on it, by making sure that we gave them flexibility, but we expected a lot, and it was a high-performing environment.
One thing that I think is, you said is really helpful. First of all, we were roles that are expectations are set clearly give people a lot of reduce a lot of stress. I know what is expected of me. I know what's expected of me. I know how it is going to be measured. I know how to communicate about it. And then one of the terms, I guess, that I use a lot that people get tired of hearing, but is, like you mentioned, is you set the standard, and then you demonstrate the standard, and then you can hold others accountable to the standard. Prior to that, like you said, if you say one thing and do another, it really minimizes all of that. And I think that like you mentioned about how long you work, the numbers showed, in that business. Like if you produced your results, it was pretty fantastic. And I'm trying to remember, were you at, I had like a barbecue in London with some of the leaders and performers. Do you remember that?
In your house?
In my house, yeah.
Yeah, I do remember. That's where I met your son the first time, but clearly he wouldn't remember me from then.
That's right. Okay, for those who are just not on the inside of the story of this, I'm doing this podcast from a building, commercial property that my son is a part owner of, and is running also commercial lawn services out of this. Entrepreneurial, 23 years old, hair on fire. Frank hadn't seen him since he was in my back garden in Pensford Avenue in Kew in the London area. He would have been a lot smaller then, and he just had his LinkedIn profile, I think, still shows his power washing business where he cleaned off the fences from the mold or the moss. But anyway, that type of thing, I remember that group being together with the ideas of, yes, building a business, but doing something fun together. We shared life, life's different experiences with each other, and it was about something that we could do that we were part of. Like, imagine if. And I think a lot of organizations, that any organization that does something great, they have that vision, shared vision, of not exactly what it's going to become, but to be a part of something special and to hold each other accountable to that. And I think when someone, is kind of a segue here, but when you've been in that environment, and you and I were in that, there were thousands of people in that experience, and I don't know, I've had probably literally hundreds of conversations from people who left that environment and they took their first step out and they felt it was the wrong lily pad. Like, oh, wow, it's hard out here. And then another one and another one, and it wasn't because it was cushy. We worked hard and we had some really tough stuff in building that business. But GDPR, all these things coming along when we were in the data business. People did it. But when they stepped into a different environment where culture and values were not as valued, or people were not as compassionately led, that's a different experience. I went through that. And, I'm interested in your journey of what was the experience about having something that, looking back on, like, that was a wonderful experience. It wasn't like, if people are in, a sport or music where they had a really strict coach or instructor, they didn't always love them. But looking back, they were sure grateful for that experience. I think that's what some of us do. But I'm also interested in your journey of, like, you go from that environment, and many people that listen to this will be in a pretty good place. And then the risk of going to do something else sometimes will keep them captive forever, or sometimes they jump too soon. What are your thoughts when you're in a really good environment, good situation, but it's probably time for your tour of duty to come to an end and do something else? What are your thoughts there?
it's never easy. Stepping out of a bubble, really, it's what it comes down to. But like LinkedIn obviously changed as well. And I keep on saying to people, when we started off, and it was that startup environment, and there was a lot more kind of space, as I said, we gave people space and whatever else. But it couldn't be this for long because we didn't start it to be this small forever. We wanted it to grow. This is what we worked on. So it had to change and it had to become a lot more a corporate structure and everything around us. But I mean, my next step wasn't leaving only you. I didn't leave LinkedIn. I worked on the sales solutions part, which was an incredible journey for me within LinkedIn still, because the startup environment was a true startup environment. And when we launched Sales Navigator, that was just something completely different. And being on the cold face of it, being part of some of this decision making, even pricing and everything, and working with Mike Darrison at the time, like incredible learning opportunity. So I really enjoyed that as well. And then 2016, the announcement comes around when Satya and Jeff announced Microsoft is buying LinkedIn. And I think everybody would agree, we were all shocked, and not necessarily in a good way, because Microsoft did not have a very good track record and what happens to acquired companies. But in all credit, we all know now, they truly, and Satya and Jeff done a great job as well when they came out and explained the reasoning and what they had in mind. And it's great to see, actually, it's all still there and it's really working well. And it's a standalone business and it's running really, really well. So that's the great news. But then I basically, don't know if some people call me a traitor or not, but I'm basically gone over to the dark side. And the day after the acquisition officially went through, I actually joined Microsoft. And that's a very, very different culture, very different environment. Now, having worked in Microsoft and with quite a few people who've been there 20 years and longer, I joined at the time when a lot of things had changed for the better from a culture perspective. So Satya has changed a lot of cultural environment there, but it's still a very, very different business.
If I can say something with that, I would say I didn't have the close observation you had with that, but I have, being in the technology, sales, and marketing arena almost 15, 20 years. Satya is, I think, created the greatest corporate culture turnaround in my lifetime, in our lifetime. Microsoft's always been exceptional from a performance and scale standpoint, but the Steve Ballmer years were very different than Satya, and to turn a ship like that into something that has heart, to the degree of what he was capable of, it was amazing to me, because I had the same thought you did. Like, I'm not sure I would really want to, become a part of this huge organization, and yet having, because I was at the time leading the largest line of business, and had a chance to be in some of those conversations. And like what we were told, that, well, here's what'll happen is Jeff, instead of reporting to the street, Jeff will now report to Satya. That's the only difference. Like, sure. But I would say that was true. My experience, I stayed exactly 1 year post-close. But that experience was true. I think Ryan Roslansky as a successor was a fantastic choice. Also, to the degree, I'm sure it's more, I've been around for several years in it, but more and more integrated with Microsoft. But like you said, Microsoft itself, because of the leadership, it's amazing what you can do if you put your mind to it at that kind of scale. But yeah, you jumped into you left the kiddie pool and you jumped into the big waters. What was that experience like?
I took over the mid-market for Germany, which is a $500 million ARR number. That's the first time I had a target like this over my head. And been an interesting time as well. And I learned loads again. Again, like when you look back, the learning out of every role is the most important thing. From an impact perspective, like the impact I made in a business obviously is important. That's what you get paid for. But the impact the business made on me is always then what I take away from it. And it's not just the logo. I mean, yes, I have great logos on my LinkedIn profile, but it's truly what did I actually learn, because there's a lot of people who have those great logos as well. But the learning experience for me is the most important one. So in Microsoft taking over the mid-market, then that's an account space that hadn't grown for Microsoft, because they kind of dumped all the accounts in that space that were significant size enough. Some of them were listed companies, but weren't enterprise accounts because they weren't growing fast enough. and there wasn't somebody really hand-holding them from within Microsoft. So it's a large partner network, which Microsoft manages quite well, and actually really well, because it's a massive universe of partners out there, and they were just, let them look after it. Not great for the client, and some of them rather large clients. So we built this, and it was called on purpose a digital business. It wasn't purely inside sales. There was field sellers and everything. A lot of specialism because you have 4 service lines there. So we built this infrastructure around those clients where we really support them. You put an AE in there. They have specialists for all the 4 service lines behind them. And now we're going out to those clients and trying to really sell them on not only cloud products, but we needed to get them to growth. The goal was not only to get them to double-digit growth. Oh no, that actually was the goal, but the cloud penetration as well. But then my really kind of story around that is in year 3, and I won't mention names now because it goes out on a podcast. I don't want to get in trouble for it. But in year 3, I sit in front of my boss and her boss, who was over from the States, the CVP, and basically tell the 2 of them that, and that's Q1 now of year 3, we will do 20% plus this year. And they virtually laughed me out of the room because they said, Frank, come on, we gave you a number, do that number. We struggle seeing you do that, and we'd be happy enough. And I didn't go in there because I thought, look, I'm a betting man, let's see how it works. We had a plan, and I talked to that a lot, what I'm doing now as well, but also to my teams afterwards. You build a plan, you have a very ambitious number in mind, like you're really far out number. That's the one that stays in here. You never talk about that. That's your dream number. If everything was to work your favor, but that is the number you should have in your mind because you want to kind of always look up instead of just forward. And then you pull that down to a number. Okay, if we do everything we can do, what would be that ideal number be? That's the number you create a real execution plan against. But that number was higher than 20%. Because you always know not everything will work out. You're gonna have some issues. So you pull back from that in the number you communicate. But if you can't communicate a number that is higher than the number that's given to you, then either you have the wrong setup or not a good enough plan.
Yeah, the Chicago team, when I first went and started managing the team there, they had a number for the year, small, just getting started, something like 8 million for the year. And I think it was October, November. So I don't like that number. I like 10 better. We put 10 and we all just and did it and nailed it. But you wouldn't be telling this story if you didn't hit or exceed 20%. So what was the outcome? What did you do?
So I get a call from that CVP later on when we actually hit 22%, and that's the one thing I really have to value him on that as well, because he turned around and said, Frank, I remember that meeting, and I know you were right, congratulations, well done. And again, when I say I didn't do that number, I went out to client meetings and so on, but that didn't really move the needle. I had a team that we built, we hired the right people, we spent a lot of time on making sure it was a learning environment. Again, that's always really important to me. So we've done a lot of things to actually get there. And that's why I was so confident. And the one reason why I took a risk of actually putting this out there very early on, but I didn't want somebody to turn around and say, you were lucky. No, we actually, and at the time, I could show what we were planning to do to get there and where these numbers came together. We had a clear execution plan to get to those numbers. And it took us 2 years to build to that as well. And that's why we hadn't had the trust yet from the leadership team that we could get there. But that building and that struggle we had up front was to build exactly towards that. And we celebrated that really well with the team.
Well, I think I bet you did. Also, probably not for public display, but I think that's true to your brand. So if I were, to be frank with you, that is what I have noticed is that you were very good and have been throughout your career, very good at setting expectations, not only for the team, but managing up and across. This is what it will take to do that, and not accepting something just because somebody wants a bigger number, they want some other output. You say, well, in order to do that, these things would have to happen. And the reality distortion field doesn't work very well on you. If you can't logically see a path, my observation, if you can't logically see a path there, you're going to essentially use math and say, this will happen. This is actually going to take I remember a conversation about scale, we're trying to go in some of the markets that were more expansion markets. And you were very clear that it was going to take 18 months before we had clear traction in these areas, and I didn't want 18 months. And you were like, doesn't matter. This is what it will take, no matter how much we put into it. You can't put 9 women in a room and make a baby in a month. This is what it takes. I think that's so clearly that played out, in that business as well. And then I want to be conscious of time. Also, you're plus 6 hours. I always respect that because the sun never sets. But what's so from there? What was the hop from there? Is it from there to what you're doing now, or did you have an?
No, I actually got it asked by Headhunter if I ever heard of the company called Intertrust Group, which I hadn't, but I had the conversation. Met the CCO who had only joined a couple of months prior, and he had this vision. It's a financial services outsourcing company, so it's basically financial services admin outsourcing. And he said, if we want to operate like a tech business from a sales perspective, why don't we hire somebody who does that bread and butter type? We got talking, never really done a proper interview per se, because from the first time we met, we were kind of, what would it look like? How do we structure it? And then the only thing I said to him is, because the 38 jurisdictions all over the globe, and there wasn't a central sales team. They were reporting locally or in small groups. And I said, if you really want that change, and if you want me to come in, there have to be a reporting line, because otherwise through influencing, we'll get there in 10, 15 years and I won't be around for it. So he done that. That team came together. So anywhere, San Francisco to Sydney, Tokyo to Sao Paulo, anywhere in between, we had people, and I call them sometimes onesies and twosies, because if you have just one person sitting out in Tokyo, it's not really a team. But what we did is basically taking over that team, or I took over that team. I'm going to say we brought in a few people, obviously, as well. And then they had an average performance just under 350K a year per head. And I, from year one, actually said, target should be $1 million average. And I gave them those targets. And they all thought, oh yeah, crazy German, doesn't even know our industry, doesn't know what he's talking about. But there's, again, a reason why I did that, because in year 2, in 2021, we achieved 997K per head. And I say on purpose, 997K, I always say, spot the German, can't say $1 million. No, it's because in sales you have to be accurate. Most people don't trust their sales leaders, because rounding up and rounding down and massaging numbers, if you want to be trusted, you have to be accurate. So 997K is the performance we got out of them. If I would have given them in year one...
Sorry to interrupt on that. The 997, where we're so aligned on that is, if you swim 99% of the way across the lake and stop, you still drown.
Yeah.
Right. So the idea of precision is exactly what you said too. And one thing you think you've also been clear about is, if you miss above or below, you still miss, right? The accuracy isn't just sandbagging. Like, accuracy is knowing your business. And so I think that's pretty impressive that you got, so again, 18 to 24 months, noticing a pattern. You got from where the team was to that performance level. That's very, I hadn't thought about actually the timelines of different things that you've just talked about, and the time frame it took to transform, like massively transform a team. It didn't happen overnight, but it also didn't take forever.
No, it didn't happen overnight. But the key thing why I talk about that $1 million target as well, because that's where people really thought, like, this guy is nuts. What's he talking about? If I would have done the normal thing would have been, you look at it and say, oh, we need to stretch this. We need to give people stretch targets. Then you come in and the average is 350. Now let's give them 450 in the year 1, or maybe make it 5, so it's a nice round number. So in year 2, then what would it be? 650, 750 at a stretch? They would have hit the 750, and we would have celebrated everybody getting their targets at 750, but we wouldn't have gotten to 997K. You need to be ambitious. Now the key thing is, we gave back a lot of stuff as well. So we changed the comp plan, we changed a lot of the structure, like even the sales structure, terminology, everything. We've done a lot for the team to be able to do that as well. But at the same time, if I give something to you, I want that back. I want you to always have that ambition and get there. And there were people in the team when I left now earlier in the year, one of them specifically who turned around to me and told me, Frank, I really thought you were crazy, but I see the method to the madness now. And it's not about being liked. It's not about being the boss that kind of gives them everything, but it's people who in hindsight can see that they were actually part of something that made a lot of sense and changed the business the right way. That's important to me to kind of just hear that people understand now, not at the time. Anyway, that business got acquired last year as well. We've done a few other things because one thing I learned at Microsoft is not just data is always important. And I was always kind of a data-driven person, but like how we work with data now in my last permanent role, I changed that entirely for the business. So I hired a data team out in India, created Power BI dashboards, and I really walked away from doing it for sales. I done this for the entire company and built out our sales operations team as a service team to the entire organization as well. That made a massive difference as well, and stakeholder management becomes very easy. Never very easy, to be fair, make it sound easy, but became much easier when you're actually starting to be not just the revenue guy and the numbers guy, but you also deliver services. Anyway, to cut that story short, then business gets acquired. I'm always on the wrong side of the acquisition. Being acquired again, obviously changes that happened. I took my redundancy earlier in the year, finished then with the business the end of April, and decided to start my own business. So since May this year, I'm now calling myself the CEO of Alpha BGS Commercial, and that going out, I shouldn't say it like that. It is a great company, but currently it is just me, so that's why I shouldn't say it's a great company. But I'm trying to basically do everything I explained to you. I try to help companies with. So really go and help companies doing that. In the startup environment, more in advisory capacity, because they often don't necessarily have the scope or the financial opportunity to kind of bring somebody in. But then I do advisory work there. And otherwise, I do fractional leadership as well. So starting just now to work with a great startup called Sitcha out of Australia. That will go on the profile probably in January. But the opportunity there is really building out the organization for them in Europe, and they doing something very different. I'm working with a couple of other companies as well. So there's a lot happening. It's really interesting. But being your own boss, and you know that very well, there's weeks obviously where you think like, what am I doing? And you think maybe corporate world isn't too bad. But when it comes down to it, I do enjoy it. And the good thing is you learn a lot about yourself. And you have to talk to so many more businesses again, so you learn again every day through every conversation. That's where I am today.
Yeah, well, first of all, that's great to hear. Congratulations on stepping out. I think so many people want to be in business for themselves. They want to go take their skills to market. And oftentimes there's an imposter syndrome that says, well, maybe I don't really have the skills or valuable in the market, which is absolutely almost always not true. If you've been faking it all the way along, at some point, things wouldn't have worked out for most folks. But the other thing I see is they also look at the idea that this is a one-person business. But I would tell you this, like as an investor, there are not many bets that are better than to bet on Frank. Like as a person, if you looked at yourself as a company, would you bet on you? Of course you'd bet on you. You've done it a lot.
I am heavily betting on myself.
You are, and I think that as an investor, early stage stuff, that like 18 portfolio sort of companies in one way or another. The last 18 months have been really challenging and fantastic in this way. The headwinds of economic challenge really cause companies to determine what matters, and you get rid of all the fluffy stuff. And the biggest change that I've seen companies make that's been really positive from a revenue standpoint has been leadership, structure, process, and focus. And for someone like yourself, often it's not just let's hire a new, sales leader, marketing leader. It's usually someone to be able to look more broadly at your company. It often doesn't make sense to bring in a CRO at various stages, but what you're doing, and I've seen a few people, around the globe doing this, is offering what you've seen at companies that grow very fast, companies that are very large and still can be improved, at take a 3x the quota. That's exceptional. But those things are what I think companies look for. This quarter, I've had like the headhunter calls were pretty low this year generally but boy, this quarter it's been a ton of them, and it's primarily because companies are looking for the quick fix. We just get a new leader and it'll be good, and that might be the case. But as you see, I really like the idea of going in and helping take a bird's eye view of the organization, and maybe it's interim leader. Maybe it's fractional, like you said, but I do see that as a trend, and I hope a positive trend, because if I were doing a startup and I could have someone like you for 25 hours a week, or I could have someone who hadn't quite done it yet, wasn't quite there, for 50 hours a week, my bet's going to be on Frank for 25. But anyways, it's great to see you. And just as we wrap up here,
the one thing can I
yes, go ahead.
Just as a reaction to that, I think the key thing is as well, what do you expect and what turnarounds? Because loads of people say, I want to bring somebody in and we need to change something quickly. Take a proven leader for that change, because the biggest impact people have is usually within their first 90 to 180 days, because that's when they understand the business and then present the plan and implement the plan. But half the time you don't need that person to sit there for 2 years and watch it all happen. You need them to actually bring you the idea and help you maybe implement it, or maybe not even help you implement it. But that's the key thing, again, the wood for the trees problem as well, to actually come in and has a fresh set of eyes. Advisory, I think, is something, and I'm not doing this in a self-serving manner, because most people who watch you are probably stateside and are far away, even though I'm just a phone call away, I'm just saying that. But the key thing is, I'm still a salesperson.
Always selling.
Yeah, the key thing is, I think, an advisor who gives you honest feedback, who looks at your business, and that can be somebody really kind of arm's length that you call on once a quarter. They don't need to sit on your board. You just need sometimes somebody who knows what they're talking about and will tell you what you don't want to hear.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I've had, it was just brought to my attention by my EA earlier this year, maybe last year, that I spent a good part of my career, taking those phone calls, being the advisor and not charging for it. So I actually have a consulting company, like not on purpose, sort of by mistake, but for the same reasons. And it's interesting that, I think you can learn a lot. Well, they say that mistakes or that experience is the best teacher. I have found that evaluated experience is the best teacher. And another person's evaluated mistake is the best teacher. So I think that those relationships are always very important. But at a time like this also, you said something else that I think is very important for people who use external resources. I have two things that I see from most of the businesses I work with. And to be fair, most of them are either a company I've invested in or I'm on the board of, and so it's a little bit different, but similar idea. A lot of them don't have the patience to see it through. And what you mentioned about your experiences in the corporate world, about knowing how long something would take and the expectations for turnaround, very important. A lot of early career people want to overpromise. They want to talk about these quick things that are going to happen. And I've worked for 2 or 3 companies, since you and I worked together, that in many cases couldn't pull they couldn't take that time for it to turn around, got too nervous too quickly. And that is a downward spiral if you keep switching because you don't gain momentum on anything. And you got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them. But that idea of someone like yourself who can set expectations, these are the things that should happen. Like you said, first 90 days is huge. But that doesn't mean things are going to change in 90 days, right? That's when you implement things. And then the results come later. So I think it's very interesting that you bring that to the table, because I don't see that very often, of knowing when to see results.
Sorry, in sales you can predict those results as well, because you know your sales cycles, you know your conversion rates. So if you make that plan precise enough, you can say, if you take this action, it will take you 6 months to see it reflected in your pipeline, and another 3 months to reflect it in your results. If that's kind of your data, so you should be able to actually precisely forecast that. But as you say, most companies will not show always the patience. The other thing, I think, the extreme pendulum swings, which this is more costly for firms than anything. So we try inside sales. Let's all go inside sales. Nothing else will work. You do that for 2 years and then you're not happy with the results. You hire a new leader who says, no, inside is all rubbish. We need to go all field, everybody field. Those are so costly, those constant swings in the extreme. What you need to is adjust. You need to figure out what of this is really working for me and where do I nuancedly actually add maybe something or change something to it. When you do that right, your company can maybe grow. Sometimes it takes you a quarter longer to go there, but it grow exponentially a lot bigger because you're not constantly interrupting the actual growth you had.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And you get that trust. You get the trust with each other that way too. And I think that's it makes it really fun when you can go have the patience to get through those times together. But it's a little bit like in the US and the UK also, but politically it swings back and forth, back and forth, back and forth every 4 to 8 years. And therefore not much gets done except a lot of noise and cost. So when it's all said and done in business and in politics and in life, when it's all said and done, there's usually more said than done. But one of the things I really appreciate about our relationship is trust, I think, number one, work ethic, but also we've always agreed on what to measure. And like at the end of the day, and I think that helps a lot in, personal, and I guess maybe not personal, but professional relationships. So yeah, well, I want to respect your time. This is where exactly at an hour.
Just let me compliment you on that though. You were really always good on not just measurable because everybody talks about it and we have all those wonderful things, but between you and Mike as well, Darrison, the precise wording was always really important. So, and it's about this observable behavior stuff. So I learned a lot as well, and I'm more into semantics than I ever was after working with you as well, because it's really being precise. Okay, what do I expect from you? So Frank, and here is something, the fair feedback as well, always kind of, here's something I didn't like to see, or here's something I would want to see differently, but really with precise wording, observed behaviors, so you can straight away actually go back and say, yeah, he's right. And you won't go there again because you understand as well what's meant. It's not just a word thrown at you, unhappy or not quite there yet. That doesn't help me. Tell me exactly what were you missing. So you were really, really good at this, and that builds trust as well. And I think this is why, and you gave me that space as well. Like you were really kind of, I want to see what you do, kind of surprised me with certain things. But you gave me a lot of space. I on purpose didn't say you gave me a lot of rope. You gave me that space, but then you gave me that honest feedback as well. So that was really, really kind of what built that trust and built that relationship, and to me made it really easy.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, and I think words do matter. And unfortunately, I only speak one language. I'm not, like you, as proficient in many things in life, but I speak that one language moderately well. But words matter, and I think a lot of people, there's a saying that I used to hear growing up. That was, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Nothing can be further from the truth. Words hurt a lot, and words inspire a lot. They can do a lot of different things, and people remember words. And I think that's one thing that it's not like you need the script, but there's an ancient saying that says, when they deliver you up, think not about what you should say, because it's about what's inside of you. And if you can articulate that in a way that helps someone understand, it can be harsh, it can be soft, it can be corrective, it can be empowering. But if it's honest, I think that works really well. So anyway, we could talk for a long time, and maybe we should. But I look forward to hopping the pond again, get an Aer Lingus flight over and catch up, or come. I'm in Austin, Texas now. You got to get to Texas. So
I have to get to Texas, clearly.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, thanks for taking the time, Frank. I appreciate it, and have a good night, and I'll finish my afternoon.
Thanks again for having me. All the best.